Good day, and welcome to General Answers Weekly Wraps. I'm Vav Govender, and as usual, what we'll do is we'll cover some stories over the last week or so that affect you and your investments going forward, and also do a little bit of a tech/AI wrap at the end. Our stories of the week are going to be the IPOs of Instacart and AMD, how they've done since they've listed in the last couple of days. Then we're going to look at a little uptick in geopolitical tensions. There's a spat between Canada and India. The invasion of Armenia by Azerbaijan, as well as more developments in the Ukrainian war. And then finally, we're going to end up the big stuff of the week, which is, of course, the interest rate announcements from the Fed, as well as the local Reserve Bank, South African Reserve Bank. In our AI segment, we'll discuss the launch of DALL-E 3 and what that means in terms of progress in AI. Okay, so let's start off with the IPOs that we talked about. Both those IPOs, the AMD IPO and the Instacart IPO, both came in at the upper end of estimates. We saw, AMD basically being valued significantly above what the expectations were. Instacart had the same as well. It was not significantly above, but at the really upper end of what was expected. And that held for perhaps a day. And since then, these companies have been coming down quite significantly. And why is this important? Well, it indicates that though there is a desire to exit some, of these private companies by the investors, the market may not be ready for this, or the market may not be, interested or as interested as they were in the past for these tech, stories. Or it could also be that these particular companies are not, some of the better companies out there that the market might be looking at. Let's look at AMD as we've discussed before. What we saw here is a company that has a good business, but the valuations for the company are likely too high. There are also some significant weaknesses around their operations in China, as well as some of the expectations of the market around their ability to get into the AI sector may be a bit overblown. I would probably be putting the valuation of this company significantly lower than what the current valuation is. Not to say that if the valuation goes a bit lower, there is an opportunity to buy. It is, like I said, a reasonable company, but some of the hype around it was too high. That being said, the reason for it listing at the current price, the reason that it came out as it did, was because SoftBank, the owner of the company, or the management of the company, has a cash issue, which means that they basically were required or had to sell it. We've seen very little in terms of IPO action happening in especially the tech sector over the last little while. There's some seriously large, companies out there that are still private that are looking to, get to list out into the market, but they have not been able to because, the tech sector has been such turmoil over the last, year or so because of high interest rates and other factors. And so the valuations the market be willing to accept them are not going to be there. What's especially galling to people that invested in these companies when they're private is the fact that the last round, or maybe the last couple of rounds of investors, are probably going to have to take a haircut when these companies do list. Normally, when you buy in the private sector, you want the company to list at a higher valuation than the last round that you basically purchased in at. So if you valued it at maybe 10 billion, you want to list at 20 billion in terms of market capitalization. Fortunately, right now we are finding companies that were valued in the 40s, listing in the 30s. Some where people were thinking maybe it should be listed in the 60s, are actually in the 50s, like with AMD. And it does indicate that the market is not willing to take, the promise of growth as being sufficient for valuing at the moment. This is something that we've seen in already listed companies. Where there's been a significant pullback in like a number of these companies. Things that were darlings in the market a few years ago, like Zoom, etc., have come back significantly. Now, what does this mean for the tech sector? I think that we probably are unlikely to see a real uptick in terms of tech listings, at least going forward, because the couple cases we've seen so far have not really been success stories. We need a bit of a success story to come out to really, I think, stimulate demand for more listings. Next, some geopolitical stuff. It's been a weird week. We firstly had the Canadian Prime Minister accuse India of assassinating a Canadian individual on Canadian soil. For those that don't know, Canada has had a pretty weird history with India around terrorism. The biggest terrorist attack in Canadian history involved people that were basically trying to commit active terrorism against India. There's a Sikh, separatist movement in India that's pretty much died out, but it remains strong in Canada. In fact, recently, the Canadian Sikh community basically held an election as to whether or not there should be a independent state in India for Sikhs. That would never happen in India in terms of the election. So what happened was a Sikh activist who has been accused of terrorism in India was shot dead, and apparently I think even recently another one was also shot dead. And the Canadian government has come out and said that they have, evidence that it was done by the Canadian government, not the Indian government. Why this is important? This really is not something that normal countries do. The US may go and basically kill people in Afghanistan, but the Afghanis don't go and kill people in the US. Especially these people are classified as US citizens, as this person who was killed was classified by the Canadian government. So that is a brewing national or international thing. We've already seen, for instance, India cancel visas from Canadians to India. India is a far larger country, but it's a far poorer country on average. So they have a bigger GDP, but obviously the individual Canadian is wealthier than the individual Indian. Okay, so let's just see how that develops. Other things that have happened this week in the geopolitical space: the Polish have come out and seized arms shipments to the Ukrainians. Apparently, the Ukrainian government has been angry with the Polish because they have not allowed grain shipments from Ukraine to go into Poland unrestricted, and they made their displeasure known. And the Polish have responded by saying, "No, you don't like us. We'll stop shipping arms to you." It's likely that this will blow over because there's too many real political, facts on the ground that require cooperation between the two countries. But right now, that is something that's also flared up. Another thing that's also flared up because of the Ukrainian-Russia war is an increased amount of instability in the Balkan regions and countries around Russia, the Caucasus, etc. So the latest bit has been the invasion of an enclave of Armenia by the Azerbaijanis. Azerbaijan is a much larger country than Armenia. It's a wealthier country, bigger population, stronger military. But for the last little while, Armenia was being protected by the Russians. The Russians had peacekeepers on the ground that basically prevented Azerbaijan from interfering in the enclave. But with the recent weakening of Russia due to the Ukrainian war, we've seen this particular thing blow up. And this won't be the last one, by the way. What you would understand is that Russia is the big player in that area of the world. And so they have a number of different places where they have used their power to basically calm the situation and establish a status quo that would not be there without them enforcing it. With their weakness due to the war, with their distraction in the Ukraine, what's happened is that all these kind of deals and settlements they have made in the area are suddenly now in doubt. And if the party, that the status quo is not suitable to a powerful party, you're likely to see more and more of these things happening in a number of different countries in the area. Imagine if, for instance, the US suddenly became massively struck by a war and was no longer able to intervene in Central and South America. You'd find a lot more wars happening between these countries just because of the power, of the US being diminished. So, or for instance, mention that the US was no longer able to intervene in the Middle East. How much more warfare there would be because the US has kept the peace for such a long time. Expect a similar kind of thing to be possible in that area of the world around Russia. Okay, and then in our big story of the week, we're talking about interest rates. Both the US and South Africa had interest rate announcements this week and kept it basically flat. This was expected. Yes, there's been an indication that inflation has ticked up a bit in the US. And in fact, they've come out with, the Federal Reserve has talked about the fact that they're likely to have another interest rate hike this year because of the fact that inflation seems to be rising still. In South Africa, we had inflation coming in at about 4.8%, higher than the target level of 4.5%, which is the midpoint of 3 to 6%, but still well within the target. So it kind of makes sense that we kept it unchanged, especially considering just how difficult the current economic climate in South Africa is. That being said, if the US does decide to raise in a couple of months' time or in a month's time, I would expect us to follow. We cannot afford to have us falling behind a US raise because that will weaken the currency. And once we break through that incredibly important psychological level of about $20 or $20 to the dollar, I think that we could easily establish a new range, and that could be quite scary. I mean, I've seen reports from some of the banks talking about the possibility of seeing as much as 25 rounds to the dollar by next year. I think that would be a bit extreme. But once a currency breaks the range, it's often you don't know where exactly it's going to be ending up, and I think that is something to be concerned about. So yeah, we did see that interest rate announcements coming through. Expected market kind of tanked on the US announcement, especially when they talked about another rate hike coming through. Still, I do think that the market currently expects a cut by next year, and I think that if it may be by the second half of the second quarter of next year, maybe by the half of next year. But right now the market is pricing in a significant pullback in terms of interest rates next year, some in the region of about 0.5 to 0.75%, which would be a great start. But if you look at what we've done so far, that are increasing, it'll be quite some time at that rate to get back down to where we were a couple of years ago. Now, speaking of AI, there's an announcement that came out just in the last year or so around the release of DALL-E 3. And why is this something I want to talk about? Well, it's just another major thing that's come out. When DALL-E 2 came out, I remember that was one of the first times I saw the potential of AI. DALL-E 1 had been quite simple. You had variations on the theme of certain things, but it was interesting but not very useful. DALL-E 2 was truly useful. You could really make interesting pictures with it, something that you could actually use for commercial usage, quite frankly. I spent quite some time actually playing around with it when it first came out, and I was amazed just how good it was. DALL-E 3 has come out, and of course, when you have these improvements, if there is an improvement between DALL-E 3 and DALL-E 2, but obviously it doesn't have quite the same bang as DALL-E 2 that they had with the public at the moment, just because we've expected so much already from AI and gotten so much already that yes, even though there's an improvement coming through, it hasn't been at the scale that we saw between 1 and 2. That being said, what I want to discuss here is the fact that we are seeing continuous improvements happening. There is no evidence right now that the scale law has been broken. The scale law is basically, as you increase the size of these products, as you increase the money you put into them, there's an improvement in the quality of the output. That seems to be holding. The better they make these things, the more money they put into them, the more data, the more new techniques they put into them, the better these things tend to be. And we are still seeing improvements coming through. And another thing that I saw that was interesting here was the interweaving or the interaction between DALL-E and ChatGPT-4. Why is this important? It's because, like I said, in I think my last or the one before, the modality that we consider in terms of AI programs, the idea that there's the large language models or there's generative image models, that may be a temporary thing. It may be like we had TV that was in color versus black and white, where black and white was the norm and color TV was a special thing. Or we had movies in color or with sound, where that was a special thing. That was only a special thing for a certain period of time until television with sound and color, etc., everything included, was the norm, or when movies with color and sound was the norm. Okay, I think that's what's going to be happening with these AI systems as well. The idea of having a language model, or having a generative image model, or having a video model, or having a musical model, whatever it may be just an artifact of the current level of technology. It's not something that's going to be the case in 5 to 10 years' time. I think in 5 or 10 years' time, everything is going to be everything. Okay, you're going to have a generative model that can create music or create video or create images or create text, and all interacting together. And I think that this, what we're seeing right now with DALL-E 3, linking up with GPT-4, is going to be just the first step along this pathway, this multimodality pathway. And you're going to be seeing greater and greater integration among these various sets of data, which is going to increase not just the capacity of these programs, but the kind of things you can do as well. You want to be able to do both pictures and images, but the pictures and images, also text and images, you want to just do text and images, you'll be doing more with the text and more with the images than the individual things in the past used to do alone. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.